They called it the Phoenix Initiative, like they were launching rockets to Mars, instead of redesigning a customer portal that hadn't been updated since people still thought Facebook was cool. I found out about it the way you find out about surprise parties nobody wanted to throw for you. Overhearing fragments in the break room, seeing calendar invites that somehow never made it to my inbox, while watching my entire team suddenly develop selective hearing whenever I walked past their huddles in the corner conference room. You know, that glass box where important people go to feel important, while the rest of us pretend we can't see them, gesturing dramatically at whiteboards covered in buzzwords like synergy and optimization. The first hint came on a Tuesday morning when Derek from product management walked past my desk carrying a stack of wireframes thick enough to stop a bullet. He was practically vibrating with self-importance, the kind of energy middle managers get when they think they're about to become heroes. Instead of the usual human roadblocks they were born to be, I caught a glimpse of the cover page before he clutched it to his chest like state secrets. Phoenix Initiative, Phase 1, Stakeholder Alignment. Not exactly the Pentagon Papers, but in the world of corporate mediocrity, it might as well have been the Declaration of Independence. I'd been working customer experience, optimization for 3 years, longer than Derek had even known what a user flow was. I'd redesigned our onboarding process twice, rebuilt our help documentation from scratch, and personally walked through usability testing with over 200 actual customers, while Derek was still trying to figure out the difference between wireframes and mock-ups. But apparently, none of that mattered when it came time to assemble the Avengers. For the biggest project of the quarter that afternoon, I watched through the glass as they filed into the conference room, like a procession of corporate priests heading to worship at the altar of deliverables. Derek took his place at the head of the table, flanked by Jennifer from design, who once asked me if users could see hover effects on mobile, and Marcus from engineering, who still thought responsive design was something you did after getting yelled at by your manager. They spread documents across the table like they were planning D-Day instead of updating a login screen. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same conference room where they were plotting their digital revolution was the same place where I'd presented my quarterly user research reports for the past 2 years, reports that sat in email inboxes like digital tumbleweeds, gathering dust while everyone pretended user feedback was too abstract to be actionable. I'd documented everything broken about our current portal, categorized user complaints by severity, mapped pain points across the entire customer journey, and presented solutions backed by actual data from actual humans who actually used our software. But those presentations had been relegated to the bottom of meeting agendas, squeezed between budget reviews and team-building exercises. Because apparently, knowing what users think is less important than discussing whether the office coffee should be fair trade. I knocked on the glass door, not because I expected to be invited, but because sometimes you have to force people to say the quiet part out loud. Derek looked up with that constipated expression managers get when they're about to deliver bad news, wrapped in corporate speak. "Oh, hey there, we're just doing some preliminary brainstorming for Phoenix. Nothing major yet, just high-level, strategic alignment. Translation: we're redesigning the thing you've been begging to fix for 2 years, but we're going to do it wrong and blame you when it fails." I smiled, the kind of smile you practice in bathroom mirrors before walking into performance reviews. Cool, mind. If I grab some context, since customer experience is kind of my whole deal here, Derek's eye twitched. He glanced at the others like they were a jury deciding his fate. Well, we're still defining scope, and stakeholder involvement is being evaluated through proper channels. Meaning we decided you're not important enough to include, but we're too cowardly to say it directly. Jennifer chimed in, with her signature blend of fake sweetness and actual venom. We just want to make sure we're not overwhelming anyone with too many perspectives. Sometimes, fresh eyes are better than experienced ones. The audacity was breathtaking. It was like telling a surgeon that the janitor should probably handle the heart transplant because he hasn't been corrupted by all that medical school nonsense. Fresh eyes, apparently, meant eyes that had never seen a user struggle with basic navigation. Eyes that had never sat through customer support calls, listening to people curse our interface. Design eyes that had never analyzed heat map data or conducted card sorting exercises, or done any of the foundational work that prevents you from designing digital disasters. But hey, what did I know? I'd only been doing user experience work since before it was trendy when it was still called making things that don't suck, and people actually cared about whether their customers could figure out how to use their products. I nodded slowly, processing the full scope of their stupidity. Sure thing. Let me know if you need any of that pesky institutional knowledge or user research data. I'll just be over here doing the actual customer support while you reinvent wheels that were working fine. Before I walked back to my desk, feeling that familiar cocktail of rage and disbelief that comes with watching incompetent people make decisions about things they don't understand. It's like being a mechanic and watching someone try to fix an engine with a rubber hammer while insisting they know what they're doing because they once changed their oil. The exclusion stung, not because I desperately wanted to sit in more meetings, but because it represented everything broken about how decisions get made. In corporate America, the people closest to the problems get excluded from the solutions. The people who talk to customers every day get overruled by people who think customers are theoretical concepts. The people who understand the technical constraints get ignored by people who think innovation means adding more clicks to simple processes. I spent the rest of that day doing something I'd never done before, documenting the exclusion, not for HAR purposes, but for my own sanity. I opened a private document and started recording every decision they made without consulting the person whose job it was to understand the implications. Every meeting I watched through glass walls, every conversation I overheard about user needs from people who'd never met an actual user. The Phoenix Initiative rolled forward like a drunk steamroller, leaving destruction in its path over the next 2 weeks. I watched from the sidelines as they made every mistake I could have warned them about, if they'd bothered to ask. They scheduled user interviews without screening criteria, talked to power users who represented 0% of our actual customer base, and designed workflows that would make sense to someone who spent their entire day thinking about software, but would confuse the hell out of normal humans trying to pay their bills or update their addresses. Their user research methodology was like conducting a survey about cars by only asking Formula One drivers. They interviewed our most technically sophisticated users, the ones who'd figured out workarounds for every broken feature, the ones who knew our system so well they'd forgotten what it felt like to be confused by it. Then they took feedback from these unicorn users and assumed it represented everyone else. It was like designing a restaurant menu by asking professional chefs what they wanted for lunch, while ignoring the fact that most of your customers just wanted a sandwich that didn't require a culinary degree. To understand the wireframes they produced looked like someone had taken our existing interface and fed it through a blender, operated by someone who hated usability navigation. Buried 3 clicks deep. Mandatory fields scattered across 4 different screens, and a color scheme that apparently came from a fever dream about corporate professionalism. They'd taken everything simple about our current portal and made it complicated. Everything intuitive and made it confusing. Everything that worked and broken it. In service of looking modern. I said nothing. I documented everything, every meeting I wasn't invited to, but could see through the glass. Every decision that contradicted basic UX principles. Every moment they could have asked for input, but chose to stumble forward in ignorant bliss. I started a private folder on my desktop, labeled Observations. Just time-stamped notes about their process, like a nature documentary, about corporate dysfunction in its natural habitat. The beautiful thing about being excluded from bad decisions is that you get to watch them unfold with the clarity that comes from not being emotionally invested in defending stupid choices. You get to see the moment when someone realizes they've painted themselves into a corner. You get to witness the slow, dawning horror when reality crashes into their carefully constructed assumptions. And you get to do it all while maintaining plausible deniability. Because, hey, nobody asked for your opinion. During week 3, the cracks started showing. Derek began staying late, muttering into his headset about timeline adjustments. Jennifer printed and reprinted the same wireframes with tiny modifications that somehow made them worse. Each time Marcus looked like he was questioning every life choice that led him to this conference room, where logic went to die. But they pressed on, committed to their vision of innovation, which mostly involved making simple things complicated and calling it user engagement. The first real crack appeared when Jennifer tried to walk through the new user onboarding flow with someone from marketing. Marketing people are dangerous test subjects because they're smart enough to spot bullshit, but not technical enough to make excuses for it. They'll tell you exactly when something doesn't make sense, without wrapping it in diplomatic language about user journey optimization. The marketing person lasted exactly 4 minutes before throwing her hands up and saying, "This is way too complicated. Why do I need to verify my email twice? Why are there 3 different places to upload the same document? And why does clicking save? Sometimes save and sometimes just validate without actually saving anything." Jennifer's response was a masterclass in deflection. "Well, user testing is still ongoing, and we're iterating based on feedback. But the core user experience philosophy is designed around progressive disclosure and contextual task completion, which means we broke it. But we're going to use big words to explain why. Breaking it was actually strategic. Hey, if you're enjoying this corporate train wreck, hit that subscribe button because misery loves company, and we're building a community of people who've been there. Trust me, it gets better, or at least more satisfying. Watching them struggle was like watching someone try to assemble IKEA furniture while insisting they don't need the instructions. They'd confidently thrown away the manual, which in this case was 3 years of user research and customer feedback, then spent weeks trying to figure out why nothing fit together properly, why users kept getting lost, and why simple tasks had become elaborate puzzles that required advanced degrees in software navigation. The second crack came during a stakeholder demo when the CEO himself logged into their staging environment and spent 15 minutes trying to complete a basic task that used to take 30 seconds. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He just closed his laptop and said, in the kind of calm voice that makes executives update their resumes. "This doesn't feel intuitive. Are we sure we're moving in the right direction?" That's corporate. Speak for what the hell were you thinking? Followed by someone's getting fired. But I wasn't in that meeting. I heard about it through the grapevine, the way news travels in offices, through whispered conversations, by coffee machines, and knowing looks in elevators. Apparently, Derek spent the entire session explaining user journey optimization, while the CEO's eye twitched like he was having a minor stroke. The poor man had tried to update his profile information, a task that previously required clicking profile, then edit, then save, but now involved navigating through account settings, then personal information, then profile management, then verification, then preview, then confirm, then final submission, with mandatory stops at 3 different confirmation screens and 2 additional verification steps that nobody had explained the purpose of when the CEO asked why updating an email address required 7 steps and 2 different passwords. Derek launched into a presentation about security protocols and data validation, while completely missing the point that sometimes security that's too secure becomes insecurity through user abandonment. The timeline got pushed back indefinitely, which is executive speak for. We screwed up and need to figure out how to fix it without admitting we screwed up. They called it a development phase extension to allow for additional user validation and stakeholder alignment. But everyone knew it was panic, disguised as process improvement. That's when they started looking at me differently. Not apologetic, not embarrassed, just desperate, the kind of desperation you see in people's eyes when they realize they're drowning and the life preserver is being held by someone they just insulted. It started with casual drive-bys. Derek would wander past my desk with coffee and comments about how complex user experience could be, how sometimes multiple perspectives were valuable. After all, Jennifer began teasing me on emails about design thinking and user empathy, like she'd just discovered fire and wanted to share her wisdom with the primitive masses. Marcus actually asked me about responsive breakpoints during a team stand-up, the first time he'd acknowledged my existence. Since the project launched, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. They were testing the waters, seeing if I'd forgotten about being excluded, seeing if they could slip me back into their good graces without actually acknowledging they'd been idiots for excluding me in the first place. It was like watching someone try to unburn a bridge by pretending the fire had been decorative lighting all along. But I played it cool, professional, even helpful. When they asked direct questions, I answered them with the kind of diplomatic vagueness that gave them just enough rope to hang themselves a little more each day. Yes, user testing is definitely important, I'd say. When they asked about validation methodologies, absolutely. Stakeholder feedback should be incorporated early in the process. When they wondered about project management, best practices, the beauty of it was watching them slowly realize they were lost without a map, while standing next to someone who'd been drawing detailed directions for years. They were too proud to ask for help directly, but too desperate to keep pretending they didn't need it. Every conversation became a delicate dance of them fishing for guidance, while pretending they just wanted collegial discussion, providing just enough insight to be helpful, but not enough to solve their fundamental problems. Them, growing more frustrated as they realized that user experience, expertise, wasn't something you could crowdsource from hallway conversations. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon when Derek knocked on my cube wall with the kind of defeated energy that comes from spending 3 weeks building a bridge to nowhere. His usual swagger had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like humility, mixed with barely concealed panic. "Hey, could we chat for a minute?" he asked, trying to sound casual, while his left eye performed a nervous dance that suggested anything but calm. We walked to the break room, that neutral territory where corporate confessions happen over stale donuts and bitter coffee. The same break room where 3 weeks earlier he'd been bragging about revolutionizing user experience, design, and disrupting traditional thinking about customer portal optimization. Now, he looked like someone who just discovered that disruption without direction was just destruction with better marketing. He poured himself a cup from the pot that had probably been brewing since the Clinton administration, took a sip, and made a face, like he was drinking liquid regret. The silence stretched between us, like a confession waiting to happen. "Look," he said, finally, staring into his mug like it might offer guidance. "We've hit some challenges with Phoenix. The stakeholder feedback has been more complex than anticipated translation. The CEO hated it and we're screwed." He took another sip of punishment coffee. "The user research has revealed some unexpected friction points in the current design philosophy, and we're wondering if you might have some bandwidth to consult on the project. Offer some perspective on user journey, optimization, translation. We need you to fix our mess, but we're going to frame it like you're doing us a favor, instead of us finally admitting we were idiots." The moment hung in the air between us, like smoke from a dumpster fire. I could see him calculating how much pride he was willing to swallow, how much authority he was willing to share, how desperately he needed someone who actually understood users to save him from explaining to his boss why the biggest project of the quarter had become the biggest disaster of the quarter. I could have said yes immediately, could have jumped at the chance to be included in the project. I'd been quietly watching them destroy for weeks. But revenge, like a good wine, needs time to breathe, needs to develop complexity and depth before you savor it. "I'm pretty slammed with my current customer experience initiatives," I said, checking my phone like I had somewhere important to be. "But let me see what I can shuffle around, because obviously Phoenix is a priority for the whole team." His relief was visible, like watching someone realize they weren't going to die in a plane crash. "After all, that would be amazing," he said, trying not to sound as desperate as he obviously felt. "Just some high-level feedback on user flows, maybe a quick review of the current wireframes. Nothing too intensive. Translation. Please save us from our own incompetence, but pretend it's no big deal." We set up a meeting for Monday morning, same conference room where they'd excluded me, same glass box where they'd made their brilliant decisions without my input, but this time I'd be walking in with all the leverage, holding all the cards, knowing exactly how much they needed me and exactly how much they'd been pretending they didn't over the weekend. I prepared not the way they'd prepared with buzzword bingo and wishful thinking, but the way someone prepares when they actually know what they're doing. I reviewed every customer support ticket related to the current portal, pulled user analytics from the past 6 months, interviewed 3 of our highest value customers who'd volunteered for feedback sessions that the Phoenix team had somehow never thought to conduct. I analyzed task completion rates, bounce rates, user flow, drop-offs, and conversion funnels. I mapped customer journey touchpoints, identified pain point clusters, and documented every piece of evidence that showed what users actually did versus what the Phoenix team assumed they wanted to do. Built a presentation that didn't just identify problems, but offered solutions backed by data grounded in actual user behavior and designed with the kind of systematic thinking that comes from years of watching people struggle with interfaces, built by people who never watched. People struggle with interfaces. The documents I assembled weren't just criticism. They were a masterclass in user experience design disguised as helpful feedback. Every slide contained an implicit question: how did you miss this? Every recommendation carried an unspoken observation. Someone who understood users would have caught this. Every solution demonstrated a level of expertise that made their amateur hour approach look exactly like what it was. This wasn't just about saving their project. This was about demonstrating the difference between people who design things for users and people who design things for other designers, between understanding problems through data and assuming problems through intuition, between building something that worked and building something that looked like it should work, but definitely didn't. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that makes everything look like a corporate training video about workplace depression. I walked into the conference room, carrying my laptop and a folder thick enough to stop small caliber bullets. The Phoenix team was already assembled, looking like they'd spent the weekend in a hostage situation, which in a way they had. Derek sat at the head of the table, but his usual commanding presence had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like humility. Jennifer clutched her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to sanity. Marcus stared at his laptop screen with the intensity of someone trying to will code into existence through pure desperation. The whiteboard behind them still had traces of their original brainstorming session. Faded markers outlining user personas that read like fantasy characters rather than actual human beings. Personas with names like tech-savvy Tracy and efficiency-focused Edward, who apparently represented users who loved complexity and never made mistakes. Their user journey maps looked like subway systems designed by people who'd never taken public transportation, all branching paths and optional stops without any clear indication of where normal humans actually wanted to go. "Thanks for making time for this," Derek said, his voice carrying just enough gratitude to be noticeable. "We really value your perspective on the user experience elements." And by perspective, he meant expertise. And by elements, he meant everything. Because they'd finally realized they'd been building a house without consulting anyone who understood architecture. I opened my laptop and connected to the projector. The first slide appeared on the screen. User Experience Audit, Phoenix Initiative, Current State Analysis. They leaned forward like students who just realized the final exam was today, and they'd been studying the wrong subject for 3 weeks. I started with the data, because data doesn't lie, doesn't have opinions, doesn't care about feelings or hierarchies, or who got invited to which meetings. Our current portal conversion rate is 87%. I began clicking to the next slide. Customer satisfaction scores. Average 4.2 out of 5. Task completion rates are 91% across all user segments. These aren't broken things. These are things that work. The room got quieter. Jennifer stopped pretending to take notes. Marcus looked up from his laptop. Derek's coffee cup paused, halfway to his mouth. The Phoenix redesign. I continued. Changes. The primary navigation structure introduces new terminology that users haven't requested, adds 3 additional steps to core workflows, and removes features that account For 30% of current user satisfaction ratings, the silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when people realize they've been trying to fix something that wasn't broken while breaking everything that actually worked. I clicked to the next slide. User testing results from this weekend. Because apparently, someone should actually ask users what they think. 3 participants attempted to complete basic tasks using Phoenix wireframes. Average task. Completion time increased by 240%. 2 participants abandoned tasks entirely. All 3 expressed confusion about navigation, logic, and terminology choices. The data kept coming, slide after slide of evidence that their revolutionary redesign was actually a user experience disaster disguised as innovation. User quotes appeared on screen. This is way more confusing than what we have now. Why do I need so many passwords to change my address? Where did the help section go? Everything takes forever, and I still can't figure out if I saved my changes. I wasn't cruel about it, wasn't sarcastic or condescending, just methodical, professional, presenting facts with the kind of calm authority that comes from actually knowing what you're talking about. But the subtext was clear. As highway billboards, you excluded the one person who could have prevented this. You ignored user research in favor of design trends. You prioritized what looked cool over what actually worked. And now you're sitting in a room full of evidence that every decision you made was wrong. Derek cleared his throat, the sound of a man swallowing his pride with a side of professional humiliation. This is incredibly thorough feedback, he said, trying to maintain some dignity while his project burned around him. What would you recommend as next steps? I smiled, not the fake corporate smile you use in meetings, but the real smile that comes from watching justice unfold in real time. Well, I said, clicking to my final slide, we have 2 options. Option 1, we can try to salvage the current Phoenix approach, spend another month user testing, iterating, and probably end up with something that works half as well as what we have now. Or option 2, we take a step back, identify what users actually need versus what we think looks modern, and build something that solves real problems instead of creating new ones. The choice hung in the air like incense in a corporate cathedral. Everyone knew which option made sense, but acknowledging it meant admitting they'd spent 3 weeks building a monument to their own assumptions, I think, Derek said slowly. Option 2 makes a lot of sense. Would you be willing to lead the user research phase? Help us get back on track. The moment I'd been waiting for, not just an invitation, but a request for leadership from the same people who'd decided I wasn't worth including 3 weeks ago. The same people who'd thought fresh eyes were better than experienced ones. The same people who'd excluded me because too many perspectives might slow them down. I pretended to consider it, checked my calendar like I was doing them a favor, weighed the decision like someone who had other options instead of someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment for 3 weeks. I can make that work, I said, but we'll need to start from scratch. Real user interviews, actual usability testing, data-driven decisions instead of design by committee and full authority to make user experience decisions based on research findings. Instead of committee, consensus. They nodded like bobblehead dolls in an earthquake. Absolutely, Derek said. Whatever you need. Full stakeholder, buy-in, complete project authority. Whatever resources you require. And so began the second phase of Phoenix. The phase where someone who actually understood users took control of a project designed by people who understood buzzwords. The phase where user research replaced user assumptions, where data drove decisions instead of opinions. where someone who'd been excluded for having too much perspective finally got to show what the right perspective could accomplish. The irony was delicious. They'd excluded me to avoid too many perspectives, but ended up begging me to provide the only perspective that actually mattered. They'd wanted fresh eyes, but learned that experience wasn't something you could fake with enthusiasm and good intentions. They'd thought including me would slow them down, but discovered that excluding me had brought them to a complete stop. The best part wasn't just that I fixed their project, though I did that too. Over the next 6 weeks, we rebuilt Phoenix from the ground up, conducted real user research with actual customers, designed workflows that made sense, and delivered something that improved on our existing portal instead of destroying it. We interviewed users who actually represented our customer base, not just the power users who'd learned to work around every broken feature. We tested prototypes with people who used our software once a month, not people who lived in it every day. We designed for the confused and frustrated, not just the confident and experienced. The real satisfaction came from watching them realize what they'd lost by excluding me, not just my expertise, but the credibility that comes from making decisions based on evidence instead of ego. Not just my technical skills, but the institutional knowledge that prevents you from solving problems that don't exist while ignoring problems that do. Derek became a different manager after Phoenix. More collaborative, less assuming, more likely to ask questions before making pronouncements. Jennifer started asking for user research before making design decisions. Marcus actually read usability reports before writing code. They didn't just learn to include me in projects. They learned why inclusion mattered, not because it was the right thing to do politically, but because it was the right thing to do. Practically excluding expertise doesn't make you innovative. It makes you ignorant, and ignorance disguised as leadership is still just ignorance. 6 months later, Derek got promoted to senior product manager, the kind of promotion that comes from learning how to listen instead of just talking. Jennifer led her first user research session. Marcus started building features based on user needs instead of technical possibilities. And Phoenix became the success story they'd always imagined it could be, just not the way they'd imagined getting there. The final meeting came 8 weeks after that first conversation. In the break room, Derek called it a project, retrospective, but it felt more like a confession. We sat in the same conference room where they'd originally excluded me, but this time the whiteboard was covered with user quotes, positive feedback, and metrics that actually mattered. Conversion rates had improved by 15% customer satisfaction. Scores hit 4.7 user support tickets related to navigation dropped by 60%. The numbers told the story better than any corporate speak could. "We couldn't have done this without your expertise," Derek said. And for the first time in our professional relationship, he sounded like he actually meant what he was saying. Jennifer nodded. Marcus even looked up from his laptop for a full 30 seconds. The acknowledgement felt good, but not as good as watching them understand the difference between designing for users and designing for other designers, between building something that worked and building something that looked like it should work, between including expertise and excluding it based on political convenience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone's project. It's saving it so well that they finally understand what they almost lost by trying to do it without you. So there you have it. Corporate warriors, another tale of exclusion expertise, and the sweet satisfaction of being right all along. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever been the person who could have prevented the disaster they insisted on creating without you. And remember, sometimes the best way to prove your worth isn't by fighting to be included. It's by letting them discover how much they need you when they're drowning in their own assumptions.